everyone, and welcome back to Story Studios. And this is Sunday, so that means another Questions in Catholicism video at 12 o'clock. Today's topic is going to be on the doctrine of once saved, always saved, which is a Protestant doctrine. And I don't think I ever really believed this when I was Protestant before I became Catholic. So this wasn't necessarily a hard doctrine for me to get on, just because I never truly believed it when I was Wesleyan, back in my days before college. And so let me just explain what the doctrine is. Pretty much once saved, always saved is a doctrine where if you have confessed with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then from that point forward, you will be saved, like, always. So, like, once you make that profession with your heart, truly give your life to Christ, you are then saved forever, and there's nothing you can do really to be unsaved, essentially. It's sort of like a free will version of Calvinist predestination, of if I have truly made this decision, there's nothing I can do or anything else that can do that will draw me away from it. And a lot of the times we get this doctrine, or at least, I'm sorry, not we, Protestants get this doctrine from, like, the Romans passage where it talks about there's no principalities or powers, no spirits, no humans, no power on this earth can ever take you out of my hand. However, the only thing not listed in those couple verses is you. And the only thing that can take you out of God's hand is you yourself, because we have that free will, because we can always make the decision to choose God or not to choose God. I think this can best be described by the Prodigal Son Parable, in that the son was truly with the Father. I mean, he is a son of the Father. He is an heir. He's living in the Father's house. But then he decides one day to leave. He wants to leave. He wants to now be apart from the Father, and the Father lets him. And he goes off. Eventually, he comes to the realization that living in sin is not good. He repents. He comes back. The Father, this entire time, has been not searching for him by going out, but he's been standing by his balcony hoping that he comes back. And when he sees him far off in the distance, he runs to him and embraces him. And so, although we are not always saved once we make that decision to follow Christ, because sometimes we can choose to not follow Christ, we can always come back. It's sort of like the parable of the true vine, where we can be cut off from the true vine. But it also says we can be grafted on to the true vine, and you can't really be cut off from the vine unless you're part of the vine in the first place. There's also a lot of different passages where it talks about bringing people back, bringing believers back to the faith. And I think there's a lot of parables that also reflect off of this. There's parables like the maids who are waiting for the groomsmen to return and they run out of oil, and it talks, and, like, why would Jesus be talking about being attentive all the way to the day of judgment if it didn't matter? You know, like, why be attentive in what we do if what we do ultimately doesn't matter for once saved, always saved? It's sort of like when Paul talks about how each day he works out his faith with fear and trembling. He runs the race and hopes to not be disqualified. If Paul is saying that you can be disqualified in this race, that means you can be a part of the race one moment, you can disqualify yourself later. If you look at scripture as a whole, just because you disqualify yourself doesn't mean you can't get back into the race. He talks about finishing strong. He never talks about once you start the race, you're in the race and forever, and you can never be disqualified. He talks about disqualification. And so there's some scripture to look at, but I don't want to really focus on the scriptural aspect of once saved, always saved. I think that there's plenty of scripture to support that doctrine is false. And if you were to do a quick Google search on why once saved, always saved is not biblical, I think you could find just easy resources right off the bat and just clear scriptural evidence to support it. So if you want to, go right ahead. This video is more so focusing on the argument in a more logical standpoint and how it doesn't make sense. And this is where it comes to once saved, always saved is a circular argument, because this is the classic response that Protestants will give if you're arguing with the doctrine once saved, always saved. You will say, okay, well, if someone is saved and then they're not saved later in life, the go-to response is, well, they were never saved in the first place. And then if you were to say something like, okay, what if they were saved, weren't saved, and renounced their faith and then came back? They'd say, well, they were always saved. They ended life being saved, and so, like, They never really lost their salvation in that part. And so you can never really argue the point of how once saved, always saved doesn't work, because Protestants will use a circular argument that will support their own argument, saying that, well, if this scenario disproves my doctrine, I can just say it was never there in the first place. And so they sort of use this idea of, there's this idea of you can, there's like, you are truly saved and there's like not truly saved. This is where the argument falls apart. And I think this is important to mull over, to think about if you are a Protestant, if you do believe in this doctrine of once saved, always saved. This is important to think about, because I don't even have to use scripture to show that it's unbiblical. I don't have to use scripture to show that this is illogical, because think about it. If you were to look at a situation outside of a person, let's say from the third person, if you were to say, that person grew up a Christian, gave their life to Christ, let's say at the age of 10, let's say they were baptized, let's say lived a pretty faithful life up until the age of 30. Age of 30, they then decided to convert to Buddhism or something or whatnot, and then they died a Buddhist. You would say, throughout that entire person's life, they were never truly saved. Now, if you were to ask that person, if you were to go up to that person in the time of the first 30 years, they would truly 100% believe, without a shadow of a doubt, most likely, especially in their like up to 20, let's say before they even heard about Buddhism, before they even started thinking about Buddhism, before that, grown up Christian, you ask them, hey, are you saved? They would say, yeah. They would proclaim their love for Christ. They would see it as genuine love. They would see their faith as a genuine faith. But seeing the whole picture now, seeing that you now know that at the age of 30 they become a Buddhist and that they die, you can then make the evaluation in the doctrine of once saved, always saved, that they were never saved in the first place. They never truly gave their life to Christ. And the reasoning Protestants give is, because if you truly give your life to Christ, you can never fall away from it. And that is sort of like the huge argument. Here's the thing, though. The once saved, always saved doctrine, if you believe it, you yourself will never know if you are truly saved until you die. Let me say that again. If you, a Protestant, believe in the doctrine once saved, always saved, you will never know if you are truly saved until you die. Because the only parameter that you are given as a Protestant of whether or not someone is truly saved or not truly saved is what they are at the end of their life. I highly doubt any Christian that you talk to who falls away from their faith like 50 years down the line is going to tell you, oh yeah, I could see myself falling away, or like I highly doubt that they would say like, oh yeah, my faith is not genuine. Every single Christian that I've talked to who has fallen away at the peak of their faith, like have been praying every day, reading the Bible, truly having a relationship, trusting in God, doing great works and just filling their life with Christ, they would have told you they had a genuine faith, and I would have defended that they had a genuine Christian faith. But by the doctrine of once saved, always saved, the fact that they have lost their faith, and if they die in that state, they were never truly saved to begin with. And so if you're a Protestant, if you're a Christian right now, and you believe that you are saved, and you believe your faith is genuine, you will never know if it truly is genuine. And you'll never know if you're truly saved until you die. Because by your logic, if you die and if you later in life, let's say 50 years from now, you somehow fall away from Christ. We don't know how, we can't tell the future, but let's say you do. And we can't predict the future. No one who falls away from Christ in the moment when they're a Christian would think that they would ever fall away from Christ. So let's just get that out of the way. So if you are thinking in your head like, oh, there's no possible way, there is always a way, because it happens to everyone. Not everyone, but it could happen to anyone, is what I'm trying to say. 50 years down the line, if you fall away from your faith, you are then saying that your faith today is not genuine in order to cling to this idea of once saved, always saved. I know this doctrine is supposed to bring comfort. In reality, it brings a false sense of security. And this is the false sense of security that it brings, because the logic is that at the end of your life, whatever you are, if you are a believer or not a believer, that will determine the genuineness of your faith throughout your entire life, which is bonkers. That makes zero sense. Why does God talk about why does Paul talk about finishing strong? It's not to prove that the past was genuine. As Christians, we don't believe that the past controls the outcome of the present moment. We believe that in each present moment that we are in, we have a choice of sin or God. We have a choice to follow Christ, a choice to deny ourselves, pick up our cross and follow him, or to go our own way. And even if you picked up your cross and followed him for 80% of your life, if the final 20% of your life you decide to not follow Christ, you will not be saved. That doesn't mean that the 80% of your life meant nothing. That doesn't mean that it wasn't genuine. It just means that at the end of your life, you fell away, that you didn't finish the race strong, like Paul said, that you ended up disqualifying yourself at the end. Now, let's say someone who spent 80% of their life living a life of sin, unrepentantness, but then they come to Christ at the very end. It doesn't matter. For the 80% of your life that you lived in sin apart from God, if you come to Christ and you live a faithful life in your 20% final days or years of your life, you will be going to heaven. If you are a true faithful Christian living that out for God. And so that's another example. So now that we have debunked the logic of the Protestant belief of once saved, always saved, what is the Catholic belief? The Catholic belief is that salvation, as Paul states, is a day-by-day process. Paul says that he works out his salvation day by day. There's a couple of times in Paul's letters where he refers to the people of churches as people who are being saved. And that's not like people who are being converted. He's talking to Christians who have already been baptized. And he refers to them as being in the process of being saved. So we see that salvation has a past tense, present tense, and future tense. As Catholics, we believe that the past tense, the moment that we were saved, the moment that we were brought into the covenant, which is, we equate that as the moment of beginning our salvation, is the moment where we are entered into the new covenant, is the moment of baptism, because baptism is the fulfillment of circumcision. We see that being saved is through acts that sanctify us and justify us. We see that through acts of charity, hope, faith. We then continue on being saved. Paul says in Romans chapter 13, verse 11, "Besides this, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep, for salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers." There's this sense of that salvation is a lifelong process. The idea of that the moment when I was saved and will always be saved happened on this day is not true. You can say that's when your salvation story, your journey, that's when you were brought into the new covenant, when that began. But the truth is, salvation is something that happens day after day, because we have to choose Christ every single day. This isn't just a decision we make in the past and now we have this insurance and we're good. This is something that we grow in, and it's something in which salvation in itself, it's something that we obtain it, we have it, and then we have to nurture it. We have to keep hold of it. We have to work. we actually have to follow Christ. We actually have to do things now. We have to live as Christians. We have to live in the new covenant. And as we continue to sanctify ourselves, as Jesus continues to justify ourselves through our acts, through his grace, we can then reach to the future tense of salvation, which is where we will fully be saved from sin, and that will be in heaven. That is the moment where we are truly, fully saved. Saved from sin, saved from the devil, is when we are in heaven with Christ. And so salvation from a Catholic perspective is that I was saved in my baptism. I am being saved through the sanctification, the justification acts that God is working through me by his grace. And I hope to be saved when I die, and I hope to go to heaven. That is the Catholic mindset, is you can lose your faith at any point. And we know this. When you sin, that is you renouncing your faith. Because faith is not just this believism. I talked about this in a past video. You should watch that. But faith isn't just knowledge of a fact. Faith is a lifestyle. Faith is a journey. Faith is obedience. Faith is allegiance to Christ. And whenever we sin, we are giving up our faith. But when we come back for forgiveness, and this is why forgiveness is so powerful, and this is like, I feel like forgiveness sometimes is not, it's a little bit less in the Protestant church because it doesn't mean as much. Forgiveness in the Catholic Church, it's not just a remission of sin. It's God saying, you shouldn't be allowed to come back into the new covenant because you have broken it. But because Jesus has died and was resurrected, because of the cross, he has made a way for you to come back into the new covenant, even though you messed up, that's not how a covenant works. Once you mess up in a covenant, you're dead. But whenever we sin, we mess up the new covenant. But then Jesus's death, his sacrifice, it allows us to come back in numerous amount of times. His forgiveness never runs out, and that is so miraculous. So the doctrine of once saved, always saved, it's not biblical, and it doesn't make sense logically. But to not believe, to believe in the fact that we are not like once saved, always saved, but that you can gauge your salvation from where your heart is day by day. Because on the one hand, in the once saved, always saved category, you will never know if you're saved until you die. And that's just how the argument works. I mean, most people try to think like, oh, once saved, always saved is cushy, because if I know I'm saved, then I know I'll always be saved and I'm safe. But by the Protestant argument of if you lose your faith at the end of your life, then none of it was genuine to begin with. You therefore will never know if you're saved unless you know where you're going to be at the end of your life, which no one knows that other than God. So once saved, always saved means you will never know if you're saved. The Catholic perspective of salvation, the past tense, present, and future tense of salvation, you will always know if you will be saved or not, because just evaluate your heart. Evaluate where you are with Christ. If it's not a good place, it's okay, because God is there and he's going to help you come closer to him. He's going to help you return your heart to his possession and not to whatever idols or whatever desires that you have in this world. And it's always great to wake up and to evaluate your heart and to see, do I truly love Christ? Am I truly following Christ? If you say that yes, with certainty and with truth, then you can have faith that you are saved. In that moment, if you were to die that day, you'd be saved. But today's another day. Tomorrow is another battle, and tomorrow's another day. And so we just always have to be attentive. We always have to pummel our bodies, like Paul says, to train our bodies, lest that we may disqualify the race. And so I'll be praying for all of you. I hope I've given you good food for thought. Please be praying for me. I'm Nathan Sawyer. This is Sawyer Studios. I'll see you all next Sunday. God bless.